Good afternoon. This is Alpena's Association of Lifelong Learners, and thank you for coming. Today, our presentation is Information, Disinformation, and Propaganda. Our presenter is Roland, retired U.S. Air Force Colonel, many times a presenter for all. And he does talks on travel experiences, which we really like. And also recently, more arcane topics like mosquitoes, neologisms, and fortunately for us, he's willing to share. Thank you for coming.
Okay, to reiterate what Linda said, Dick's got a microphone over here on this side and Linda's got one on this side. And so most of you, I recognize most of you who are here. You know that during these presentations, they're probably going to be, especially today, questions. And let's try to get the questions when they show up, rather than wait till the end, because you'll forget them or I'll forget them or something will happen and they won't be as relevant if we don't handle them in the part of the presentation when they come to your mind. So feel free at any time to interrupt, we'll stop, but you have to use the microphone because this is being recorded and the only way we can get the audio to take is if you think, and also the people in Zoom land want to hear what's happening. For the people in Zoom land, if you cannot hear the questions, if you have questions, there's a chat function in Zoom. It's a little button at the top, bottom of your page. And at any time you can send a message, a chat message, and our Zoom control master will see it and he can relay the questions here, and we'll try. It's a little harder to answer questions from Zoom people, but we'll do our best to try to do that. And so anybody, any questions on what's happening here in the whole thing? Off we go. Now, this is what I said I will be willing to send to people who want it, rockyroland@gmail.com. And this is not the full list, but this is a list that'll get you started on things that are in this presentation. And you can see one of the things that we talked a little bit earlier about is this presentation, and to a large degree, is about sources and how to filter sources and how to identify sources and realize the bias of sources. And everybody has bias, including me. This is a biased information because I'm giving it. Okay? And I have my biases and my worldview, and we're going to cover all these terms that I'm talking about in this presentation. But no, every single person in the world has biases. And they're unconscious to most of us, and they just permeate everything we say, think, and do. Okay? So in this presentation, I tried my best to maintain neutral bias, because these are so sensitive topics, okay, on the thing. It's really hard because every time you look up to bias, guess what shows up? Bias, like this. And so you're spending all your time filtering these things. The other thing that we'll find today is this is a presentation about the information and disinformation and propaganda itself and how it's done. It's not about specific items of disinformation, although there will be examples we have to in order to try to understand what these things are. But we don't want, or I prefer not, to get into a discussion of what about this critical race theory? What about this? I don't want to do that. That's not what this is about. Okay? This is about trying to be able to identify as people, when you see something in print or online or things, what is the relative truthfulness and reliability of that information, and how can I check that out? That's what we're going to try to do today. Everybody with me? So that's the sources. It's partially a trust issue. In other words, we find ourselves in a crisis now because of a lack of trust. Okay, and this is, it gives an idea here of and most people have heard of the Pew Research Center. Has anybody in here not heard of the Pew Research Center? They are, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most reliable sources out there. They are very, very, very careful to try to have unbiased information in their presentations. This is their data. So it's about as reliable as you're gonna, you can find things that'll go the other way and split. I mean, because what? There's disinformation, propaganda and things, everything out there. And every one of these slides that we have in here can be refuted by somebody. That's what this is all about. It's partially a trust issue of the information. Okay, remember the first one is about government. The first slide is trust of the central government. This is a slide of trust of information. And if you look at that slide, you can kind of get an idea of why we're having troubles right now. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Yeah, look at that. Now, there's all kinds of terms and items and things. And so we could also spend hours trying to nail down specific terms and items. And you'll find as we go along that trying to differentiate between disinformation and fake news and propaganda is really hard. It's not cut and dried what's what and what basket each one of those fits in. But they're all of those are manipulative information. In other words, they are designed to get to someone to react. They're designed to get someone to react to it, and hopefully, on the part of the person who made the information, do something, not just see it and do that. So that's why these things are manipulative informations, disinformation, misinformation, false information, propaganda, all these things in here. Now, these are some, what I would say are fairly well agreed upon definitions, if you will, or examples of the difference between misinformation and disinformation. And the big thing is, in misinformation, there's no beginning intent to deceive. Could be flat out wrong, could be a hoax, could be anything, but the person who's doing its intent is not to deceive, and that's most of us. When we share something that we saw online and it's flat out false, but wasn't our intent ever when we did that to intentionally deceive someone. That's misinformation. But there are lots and tons of people and agencies and organizations out there who develop information specifically to deceive. Their whole intent is to deceive. Deep fakes, falsified photos, totally counterfeit websites. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of totally false news websites. Hundreds of them out there, taken out of context, and in many cases, totally fictional. But it boils down to intent. Why did they post this in the first place? Because they want to get some action. And we're going to see later on what those actions are. There's also in the title of the presentation, and then we're going to talk about this as we go through all of these things, propaganda. Now, what's the difference between propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, and we're going to go in a minute to fake news? Well, propaganda, most of us grew up with a definition of propaganda. We're thinking of Russia and the US and Nazi Germany and all these things where they had these massive campaigns out there to convince people of things. Well, that idea still exists. I'll give you an example. What is the number? We all see this every day, totally thing, and it's propaganda, every bit of it. Advertising. all of the advertising that we see day to day on television, online, in newspapers is propaganda. Because it's specifically designed to get you to react and do something. Do something. So that's a propaganda campaign. Now, we don't think of that, that doesn't ring a bell with us as propaganda, but that's what propaganda is. These pictures here on this is things that have come out in the last years that are examples of propaganda. Now, a relatively new term on the board for us here is fake news. Been around for a few years on the thing. And what's the difference between disinformation, fake news, and propaganda? It's really hard to separate those out into things. Disinformation, which is what? Intent to deceive. Fake news, intent to deceive. Okay, so really the news part of it is probably the difference. The news. Now you see, so these are examples of fake news. These on the screen here. The one on the left there, the crime statistics 2015, totally false. All the information in that slide is totally false. Now, why would a person post this information? Because they're trying to get a reaction. They're trying to generate some action. They're trying to get people to share and share and share this because they believe in their worldview this is right. Now, the closest thing on here that's true is the blacks killed by blacks. That's 97%. This is FBI information on the bottom. 90%. That's pretty close. So that's close enough. We can probably say, yeah, that's pretty accurate. Because all these data sources. All the rest of it's opposite. Whites killed by whites, 82-16. Whites killed by blacks, just the reverse. So you can see that somebody manipulated the data to try to get a specific reaction out of people. That's an example of disinformation and fake news. On the right, Idaho mother sentenced to prison, blah, blah, blah. We don't care, right? We don't care about that title or thing, but what do we care about in this picture? The Seattle Tribune, right? Totally 100% fake. There is no such thing as the Seattle Tribune's, never has existed, never will exist. Hundreds of sites like this out there that look and appear to casual observers as totally realistic. I remember both of these. I remember this on the left, this video that was posted 2017. I remember when that was making the rounds. We can understand what the intent is of the person who posted this video. Totally false, totally made up, inaccurate. On the right, Ghost of Kiev shot down 40 Russian jets. This happens to be a news article from New Delhi, but it was shared millions of times across. Totally false. There is no Ghost of Kiev, but it's viewed 1.6 million times. Disinformation, fake news. On the left, the Washington Standard. Anybody ever heard of the Washington Standard? No. Well, you wouldn't because almost doesn't exist. The Washington Standard existed from about 1890 to 1921 as a reputable newspaper in Washington State. In Washington State. But somebody took over the name, made the website. People think when they see the Washington Standard, what? Washington, D.C. This is one of the Washington, D.C. newspapers. This is an everyday posting website. This is a recent post on this website. No reprieve for consumers is what that's saying. And they gave themselves a raise. True or false? False. False. But millions of people shared this and on because they want to believe that it's true. Okay. There is money that was spent on congressional salaries for the staff. When this was posted after a bill was passed that increased the money for salaries of congressional staff, but no Congress people got any raises or anything. And then fake news. Here's the thing. Now, this is another one where I can probably send this if people are interested. This tells you what to do, what to think about, what to look at to try to identify is something fake or not. You're still going to be caught. We're all going to be caught because they're really, really good at what they do. They're really, really good at what they do. But this gives you an idea, all these steps. However, and we talked a little bit earlier about propaganda. Usually we associate that with state actors, Russia, China. Whoops, what happened here? I lost it. Oh, well, we'll get it later. Here's some cognitive biases. This is why we believe what we believe. And this is, I told you, I have biases, you do too. You have all of these, every one of us to a certain degree. The Dunning-Kruger effect is kind of interesting. That's the less you know, the more confident in your own ability. Yeah, and that's a real factor. That's a factor out there. It's only when you really start to know stuff, you realize how incompetent you really are. And so you see people all the time. Groupthink is another thing we're going to cover again. You're going to see that over and over because that's a very common manipulative method. False consensus too. Here's some things, and this has to do like the Dunning-Kruger. The misinformed are often more confident in their beliefs than those that are correctly informed. Why? Can you think anything off the top of your head? Usually because they have a source they go to and that's their source. Where people who really do know the correct data have checked 20 sources and distilled it down and they've figured out, but they're not really sure because this source says this and this and this and they don't agree. So the people who are closer to correct data are not as confident in their view as the people who have glommed on to disinformation or fake news. Now, what these motivated reasonings, that's us. Reasoning is us. Confirmation bias. Anybody heard of that before? Yeah, it's very, very been around for years. Been around this term and the understanding of it. What that means is all of us, every person tends to only want to read information that supports their views. And they don't want to hear something that doesn't. That's confirmation bias. So you go to a site, you read the headlines. If it kind of corresponds to what you think, you read it. If the headline doesn't, you do what? Selectively avoid. So that selective avoidance is the opposite of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias, you read what you want to hear. Selective avoidance, you don't read anything that wants to conflict with what you already believe. Okay. Mood affiliation. That goes along with groupthink. We tend to, as human beings, love to be in groups, and we love to be around people who think like we do. That's just who we are. That's association of lifelong learners. No, I mean, really, it is. A sub-element is, why is there such a thing as association of lifelong learners? Because there's a group of people out there who like being around other curious people. So we have a group. That's mood affiliation. Cultural sorting, same thing. I used to teach adult Sunday school years ago, and we always talked a lot about PLUs, people like us. All around the world, every place you go, there is automatic cultural sorting into small groups of people like us, because people want to be around people that support what they are. Okay? Cultural sorting. And then asymmetric insight. This is the last one. You're going to learn all these terms, and tomorrow you won't remember it. Asymmetric insight means, oh, well, they're wrong. I know what they think, and that's wrong. That's asymmetric insight. That's projecting your knowledge of what somebody else thinks, and besides that, they're wrong. All these are confirmed psychological biases that we all have. We all have. Every one of us has these. How much they affect what we do, understand, read, and study. This is another term. Anybody heard this term before? Worldview. Yes, no, some, quite a few. Worldview is a very, very important term. And because what worldview is each one of us has our own, and each one of us is totally different from every other person in here. And this kind of slide at the upper left with foggy glasses is we see things through our own lenses, not through your lenses or this. I see them through mine. And what I see, this whole circular graph in the middle, are these developments that form each one of our own worldviews. And so you have religion, you have social connections, you have culture, you have learning, education, environment you live in. All of this stuff builds your own personal worldview, and then you see the world through that. And you cannot change it. It's never changing. I mean, in other words, intentionally. You can't change what you see because that's who you are. That's what worldview is. And the bit on the right down there, the reason that bit on the right is that if you have a worldview that's different than somebody and you're trying to convince them, guess how that works? That's like talking into a brick wall, right? Yeah, that's why that slide's in there, to show you. You just can't take your megaphone out and say, hey, you need to learn this. Doesn't work. And what about media bias? Is there any media bias? That's why we're having this whole thing, right? These are various sub-elements of media bias and how that happens and how they do it. And some of it's intentional and some of it's not intentional, just like us. For confirmation bias, selective avoidance, organizations have the same biases. So how do they do it? By commission. In other words, they like what they print, so they print that. Or omission, selective avoidance. I'm not printing that. They cut it out. Selecting sources. That's what we're talking about. How do you select your sources? If they use the same sources and go to them all the time, that's bias. Where do they put it in their, where do they put it? Is it headlined? Is it above the fold? That's a newspaper term. Is it above the fold? Well, somebody then had to make that decision. If it's above the fold, is it more important or less important than what's below the fold? More important. Yeah, according to who? The media guys who made this decision. But then what happens? It becomes more important because they know 54% of the people read above the fold and 24% only don't read below the fold. They only read above the fold. So that's every one of these things they know. They do it by spin, by labeling and stereotyping. We're going to talk by algorithm in social media. And we're going to talk about that too. You're going to be sick of this stuff by the time we get done. Here's groupthink, labeling, and stereotyping. Groupthink. Anybody believe this is true? That definition of groupthink? You betcha. You betcha. People inside groups, oftentimes, not 100% of the time, but oftentimes, they are much more attuned to maintaining the homogeneity of that group than to listening to what an outsider has to say. And labeling, we all do this. Right, left. What does that mean? Does that mean turn left, turn right? Not in this briefing, right? So I say right, left, you know right away what I'm talking about, right? And it's not the blinker on my car, right? You know what I'm saying? So there's all these labels that we put on here: addict, idiot, fat. Those are all labels, and they're all stereotypes. And we use them every day. We make our decisions about people 4 seconds after we see them. Never talk to them. Haven't heard a word they said. We already know who you are. Yeah, I mean, really, that's what we do. That's all these things. What is stereotyping? That's where you make cutouts of people and you have in your mind of what is white, black, gay, Jewish, Protestant, Catholic, left, right, old, new, addict, All these things are stereotypes, and we all in our heads have, when that word comes up, we have an image that pops into our head that does that. And what are some examples? There you are. Now, one of the things that you see here, and this goes back to psychology and studying psychology, and another term called gross generalization. Anybody heard of that? Gross generalization means blondes are dumb. Are blondes dumb? Yeah, some of them, right? You betcha. They got the same number of dumb people as anybody else, right? But a gross generalization is blondes are dumb. Yeah, the same thing here. Southerners are rednecks. Muslims are terrorists. White people can't dance. You know, all of these things. Well, I don't know. I've seen you go, so I'm not so sure that you should be saying that. Anyway, you get me. You see what I'm saying? Okay, now one of the things, and this presentation is going to focus more on the digital part of information than it is on newspapers and television. Now we're going to talk about those others, but really focusing here on digital things. Digital consumers have extremely limited attention spans. They want to go click, 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 click. They ain't stopping. They're clicking through. So how do you get them to stop? How do you get somebody to stop that has a very short attention span? Well, you've got to have something that's extreme or compelling or weird. You got to have something that hits them right in the face, and then maybe they'll stop. And then you have to realize that the financial goal of all these social media and digital organizations is to keep you engaged on their site. That's their goal. They'll do whatever they have to do. And that's our problem. That's our problem. They'll do whatever they have to do to keep you on that site. And that's called stickiness. And what does that do? Increases advertising revenue. So it's all about the money. All about the money. And it's about keeping everybody who visits on one site and trying to make them so they don't leave. Okay, memes. Everybody's probably heard of this word online, memes and things. Nobody knows what it is. Here's the definition of it. It activates thoughts or feelings in a specific audience. So it's aimed at somebody. So from these pictures, who are they aimed at? Well, if you read that through that, you'll be able to figure it out. You can figure out who these photos, who these things, who they're aimed at, and what kind of a reaction are they trying to get. These are memes all over, everywhere, every website you look at, they're out there. And then there are tropes. Hard to tell from memes. The biggest thing here is tropes usually have to do with literature or movies or culture or something like that. So they're a little bit different. The one down in the lower left there with Indiana Jones. There's a subtle context in that whole shooting in that market scene that does two things. Denigrates who? All those African people in that market. And what? Weapons. Who's better? Who's got the better weapon? Indiana Jones, because the guy's doing his sword play. Wow, gee, whoa, I got the sword, and he goes, boom. That's a classic. It comes up over and over and over again. Horror movie plot generator. I think that's really cool. Pick one from each column, and you got yourself a horror movie. And that's because that's what that's what we like. That's what we're attuned to. That's what we all know that because we've seen these things and we know it. So all you have to do if you're a fake guy is you pick one from each column and they'll watch. And bots. These are probably the most dangerous part of these things we just talked about so far. Bots. Bots are not people, right? Bots are software written it's short for robot, but it's a software application. And it's created to act like a human. And it can go post things and scrape things and delete things on the things. And so you have bot attacks. And the most important part of this slide is the circle on the left-hand side there. And it's a little hard to read, but the main takeaway of that is 70% of the actions on the internet are bots. They're not people, but you can't tell and I can't tell. We can't tell that those things were generated by bots and trolls. Now we all know we have trolls here. We're trolls, right? All of us. Why? Because we live below the bridge. Come on, get with me here. We're below the bridge. So we're all trolls here in Alpena. But these trolls are different. That's a person who kind of lurks, hangs around in a website, watches, sees somebody and decides, I am going to blast them. And they leap in there with abusive, fiery language and they try to get the fight going. Now, do the internet people who source that, whose site that is like that? Yeah, because that keeps, an argument does what? Keeps things alive, keeps that going, doesn't die, goes on and on and on. So the internet source people love trolls because they keep that argument going. How about state misinformation or propaganda, if you want to call it that? These slides in the middle here are all products of the Russian Internet Research Agency. They did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of postings that look like individuals. This is some more info about them. They started really being in the US elections in 2016, then they transitioned to Brexit, and then also in 2016, they were heavily involved in the Dutch referendum, so they were busy little beavers, putting out all this stuff that's designed to look like it came from that country. This is all part of propaganda, censorship. Now, anybody heard of this little website that's in the bottom right there? TikTok, yeah? Who owns TikTok? Yeah, well, kind of. I mean, it's hard to say now. I mean, there's been all kinds of song and dance to try to mitigate that a little bit. ByteDance we're the developer of it, and it's a Chinese agency. And then there's some mandated thing with Walmart and Kmart and something, and all these things to spread the ownership and things and do that. But really, it's a Chinese program, TikTok. So what are we worried about? Propaganda, censorship, and surveillance, because they own it. So all the data, all the stuff, all the things in there goes where? Back to them. So they're building a bucket, we called it a bit bucket. They're building a bit bucket full of all these things, pieces of information about people. Where do teenagers get their news? TikTok, 90% of teenagers get their news from TikTok. Yahoo. What's driving us now? Changes in our media systems. In our day, when we were growing up, we had what? Daily newspapers and the evening news, right? Anybody watch the evening news with Walter Cronkite? Yeah, all of us, every single one of us, watch that. And a lot of people, 63 million people watched evening news programs back. That's a huge number because there's only 220 million people in the US back then in the 80s. That's a huge number. So what do you get when you have that centralized source? You get common information. We all had the same information. Did we argue and cuss and discuss and things? Yeah, we did. That hasn't changed. But it was from the same data set, from the same information. So what happened? Well, it was able to adapt to this rising level, but it tended towards depolarization. Why? Because we all had the same. And so there'd be this, and then people would change their minds a little. both sides, whoever. And then they go on, then the next night, brrr, and down. Yeah? But it was all started from a common central point. And then we had a, whoops, what happened there? Oh my gosh, this is pretty clever. I didn't do this. There's a high choice system out there today, which means multiple websites, multiple sources, multiple news programs, multiple everythings, millions and millions and millions. But what really happened here? In 1949, the FCC established this thing called the Fairness Doctrine. And that meant you had to be somewhat balanced. Everybody that did news, newspapers, magazines, television, radio, anybody, if you were putting out information, you had to play by the rules, which means you had to be kind of balanced. You couldn't just pick one side and ram it. Okay? Then in 1987, that was eliminated. The Fairness Doctrine went away. What's the next thing that happened along our path that we're on here? Well, anybody ever heard of Geraldo Rivera? Yeah. Well, Geraldo, in 1987, after this was things, he had these two guys on his program, and he incited a riot, and they just kicked the crap out of each other and broke his nose and arm. Geraldo Rivera's broke his nose and arm. That was a fight. They had a good one going. And what happened then subsequent to that? That became the new standard for reality program. Confrontation and violence became the new standard. Because what? People loved it. They tuned in by the hundreds. They wanted to see anger and violence. It sold revenue, sold the things. In 1988, what happened? Rush Limbaugh. Right after thing has happened, who starts? Rush Limbaugh. And what? The advent of hyperpartisan talk radio. So now what? He called his listeners what? Ditto heads. Why? Because they'd repeat whatever he said, they didn't care. If Rush said it, it was true. So it was a thing. And not that happened, but this just shows you the timeline, how fast things happen. So when this went away in mid-1987, by 1988, things had changed. Here's kind of what happened though. Now, this is today, this is the share of the ear. This is audio only, not visual. AM, FM radio, still what? 40%. That's huge. That's a huge percentage out there. What's the number one type of programming on audio radio? Music. Number two, hyperpartisan talk radio. Number one, music. Number two, here's the weekly media reach among US adults. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this gives you an idea where we spend ourselves. 92% of the people out there at some point during a week listen to radio. Where do we get our TV? Well, we know that, right? This is only important because of the little purple one. And that's 8% do not get their TV from cable or satellite. 92% of the people out there get their TV from cable or satellite. Which then what happens? Because of that, now what do you get? Talk radio on TV. You get talk radio, changes to TV, and now we have Fox in 96, and MSNBC started in 1996, exactly the same time as Fox, except they were competitor to CNN when they were first formed. They were designed to be a competitor to CNN. That didn't work. They got their butt kicked. So then they said, well, let's try to be a competitor to Fox. And so they did that. And then in 2013, CNN went away from being CNN, which it really was a news network back then, and now it's not. Because the only way it could survive and get advertising revenue was to change. Okay, that's what happened. Here's kind of your idea between those three. MSNBC, Fox News, It's kind of interesting. That's current, that's 2022. This chart is a little hard to see. This is a chart you should go look up, probably, the media bias chart. There's one major website that does it, I can't remember what the name of it is here. Ad Fontes, F-O-N-T-S, they do this all the time, every year, 2 or 3 times a year. And these things kind of change year to year and 6 months to 6 months based on the programming style of individual sources. But if you look at this in somewhat detail and you see, okay, what do I do? What do I watch? Where do I get my news? Where do I get my programming? You can see that it's spread out all over the spectrum. And you've got left and right bias, and then you've got truth and not truth bias. So you got left and right bias, left and right, and fact and not fact bias up and down. And so you see the least reliable, most biased in the lower left-hand corner, in the lower right-hand corner. And all that big cluster in the kind of top center are things that are generally speaking pretty good. And that includes almost all the stuff that we do normally, but there's some that we don't. So that's an important slide. And here's where adults get their information on social media, not TikTok, Facebook. Facebook by what? 67%. That's huge. And now the latest thing coming out there in the last few years are blogs, all right? Video blogs. And we have video bloggers out there. And they're almost all hyper-partisan, one side or the other side or somebody. They don't welcome people from opposing views. That's not what they do. That's not their standard. All the links, 90% of the links on all these sites link to other sites that link to the same polarized belief. And these are called echo chambers because of what? Confirmation bias. So people go in there and they hear what they want to hear all day long. And it's just an echo chamber. This is a graphic presentation, it only goes to 20. I could not find another source that had more recent data than 2017. This is this is again the Pew Research, and I couldn't find anything by anybody that I trusted at all that had a better view. But it does show the slopes are opposing, and their partisan divide is increasing. And there's several reasons for that. We're going to talk about some of them. And Arnold Kling, one of the authors in the group of sources there at the beginning, he calls this the rise of political tribalism. And remember when we talked about your affinity to the group is more important than your affinity to the truth or anything else? That's the rise of political tribalism. Both sides. Again, this is an equal opportunity presentation. Why does this matter? Why does this polarization matter? Because of these things. We've developed cynicism and apathy because we don't think anything's true anymore, so we don't care about these things. We take our cues from our party and our leaders. PLUs. Then there's this thing called the continued influence effect, which means manipulated information or false information tends to maintain strength even when the people who have got it the first time now know it's false. It doesn't matter. They don't care. It still retains its power. That's scary. That's the scary thing. Okay, when they know it's been manipulated information and they don't care. Here's what drives it. We talked about this. Novelty, extremism, and this is the most important thing for us, age of the user. Who are the most common people sharing false data out there? Us. People over the age, well, let's see, I better watch this. Over the age of 40. Actually, a number's higher than that, but that's the most common group by far of people sharing manipulative information, because they don't take time to look around. They just and they send it on. Fake news, and this is interesting here, true information, and who, I can give another whole talk for 2 hours on what's true. But true information has a single spike of sharing. So it comes out, it's a news story. The Giants beat the Cardinals 2-1 in the fourth. Boom. That's it. You don't see it anymore. It's gone. False information or fake news goes up and then down, but not to zero. And then it goes up and then down, and then it goes up and then down, and it keeps going because what? As it goes, all these trolls and people pile on, and it gets more extreme, more convoluted, more fake. And it keeps going until what? Until it reaches the point, and we're going to talk about this, until Hitler is referenced. There's this guy, Godwin. This is Godwin's law. And it's not a law, and it's not a thing. And it's a little bit facetious, but not, because it really happens. It's really true. Is these fake news articles, these things, they go on and on and on, and the people get nastier, nastier, nastier until they call somebody a Nazi. And then what happens? That's the end. Once that happens, there's no next step. There's nowhere to go. You've played the biggest card you have on the thing. So that news article goes poof, and it's on to the next one. So by the time you reach this reference, and it's honestly true, I watch these things all the time, and you'll see 3 post trolls beating the crap out of somebody, and well, you Nazi, you this, and then that's it. People have had enough. Once that card is played, that's Godwin's law. This stuff goes and goes and goes until somebody plays the Nazi card. And then we go. Here's an interesting slide. This is a very simple slide, right? An actual news story this is used as a reference. If we use an actual news story's reference of transmissibility as 1, in other words, it has a value of 1, fake news story is transmitted 6 times faster and better. 6 times. Why? Novel, extreme, weird pictures, stuff. It goes like that. 6 times faster if it's fake. All right, now we're going to shift gears here very suddenly, so I needed a shift gears slide. And what we're going to do is shift gears from all this disinformation, fake news and stuff. How do we go from there to anger and hate and maybe even domestic terrorism? How do we get from this to this kind of a thing? So this is the second half of the story. Anger was first studied scientifically in 1977. And the thing about this is it's everywhere, always has been. We all have it. Every one of us has it. We have anger. But that's pervasive. Episodic means we get angry and then we wouldn't. And then we'd go, and then we'd get angry and then we wouldn't. And if you get angry with someone, usually what happened? You confront them. You do this thing, you'd work something out, and it'd be over. And you go on to the next step. That's anger. And this is the first guy, 1977. There's been thousands and thousands and thousands of studies about anger. Now I'm talking about psychologists and psychiatrists and all these kinds of things. And they had a tight feedback loop with anger, which means you either went to the person or somebody, and you got somebody that told you you're right, wrong, indifferent, or something. But then it ended. And to be productive, it had to stop. For anger to be productive, it had to stop. And then there was a feeling of either triumph or embarrassment at that point. You can pass more information on when you're angry than any other way. And the benefit to the person who's angry is 3-to-1 over the person who they're angry at. In other words, there's a lot of catharsis in the person who's angry. If it stops. Louder is now often perceived as right. So the louder you are, the more right you are. And we see that all the time. Anger has become, now this is what we're talking about here, anger has become manipulated. And remember, we talked about this disinformation and fake news, and what makes something sticky? Anger, conflict. That's what makes it sticky. So what do you get? You get websites and apps and things trying to create what? Anger. They're trying to create disdain for your opponent. And then you can actually transfer to moral outrage, but we're not going to talk too much about that. But in other words, they have figured out that you make money when you make people angry. That's where the money is in angry people. What happened, however, was, and this happened starting in about 1987, about at the time of dissolution and the start of all these, of the Fairness Doctrine, is at that point, anger and attacks kind of shifted focus from policies and events to people and groups. And so this became, and there's one whole source and a whole book on demonization. So that's the new normal. What do you do if you don't like somebody's idea? Do you attack the idea? No. You call them an idiot. You call them an idiot. What do you do? You're an idiot. Stop. Get off this site. You have no business on this site. That's demonization. The two-party system that we're in now really supports this kind of demonization. Why? Because there are only two. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. So you're either this group or you're this group. And you're either stupid or you're an idiot, depending on which group you're in. Okay, so it's that's a problem with our two-party system. Now, another huge problem, and this is what's driving anger so much, and even into hate, is this targeted messaging technology. How many people have looked something up on Google and the next instant you get an advertisement for a foot warmer? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? That's targeted technology, messaging technologies. They got all this stuff. So if you're on a website, on Facebook, and you're commenting on the thing, where's all those data? What's that data going? To these. So what shows up on your feed? More extreme stuff than what you just looked at. Why? Because they want to keep you engaged. Why? Because the advertising is at the bottom of the page. So these targeted messaging technologies have driven anger to a new high because they're out there all the time. And it can be traced back to this modern analytics. I like these slides. Look at those just a minute. So what have we gotten ourselves into here? We've got into a what? Us and them scenario. We now find ourselves in an us and them scenario, and we've got the finger pointing, we've got the same exact statement from both sides, we've got two parts of the same person. That's how we are developing. And it's mostly because of these targeted technologies. And there are things, there are people, websites, groups, and organizations out there who these guys, not me, but the guys on the source page, term anger merchants. And their whole job in life is to do what? Create and sustain anger. That's their job. How do you know that they're doing a good job? Because their listeners go up and their advertising revenue goes up. So if you want to find out what sells, go into any television show, any talk radio show, and check their advertising listeners and income compared to other people. And find out what sells, where the money is. Where's the money? Anger. The money's in anger. So what do you want to do? You want to sustain the anger. You don't want it to go away. You don't want to have any resolution. So we're in a big anger incubator. Again, not my word, but I love it. Anger incubator. This is not true in anywhere other than information. If you go into Home Depot, is their goal in life to make you angry? No, they may, honest to God. You know, you may come out of there fuming, but that's not their goal in life, you know. Same thing, you know, you go into Big Boy and get breakfast, and they want you to leave cussing. No. So the only place this is applicable is in information. Because of all of these sources, these anger cycles don't get a chance to resolve. There's no longer a cycle. It goes up and what? Stays up. So people are angry all the time. And that's the new normal for them. And then eventually that creates a revenge reaction, which means I'm going to get them. I'm going to get, because what happens? What are the anger merchants doing? They're demonizing somebody or some group, right? That's what they do. They're demonizing somebody or some group. So eventually, what's somebody going to do? Well, I'll fix that. I'll just take out that group. That's how we get here, see? Here's my main man, my philosopher of choice, Yoda. Now, they also stoke fear, the anger merchants. Fear and anger. What's hate? Sustained anger. That's what hate is. Hate is sustained anger. It becomes embedded and part of you. It's no longer a cycle. It's no longer emotion. It's no longer a thing. It's part of you. That's hate. Okay, so what happens here? Hatred is strong. You don't hate someone or a group just a little. No such thing as mini hate. You know, it's powerful. And then what? If you get this anger and hate, what do? You perceive that other group or people as a threat. And what do the anger merchants do? They tell you they're a threat. They're going to take away your way of life. They are here to destroy everything. So you better do something. Time, hatred builds up over time. And you can't let go. Once this hatred gets you, it hangs around. It doesn't go away. You can't get rid of it. And then you finally reach a point where you say, I have to do something. I have to get some revenge for what they've done to me. For what they've done to me. Well, how many of us have seen that in events recently where that's the motivation? People taking revenge for what's being done. Now, here's a good example. This, everybody knows about this. This has been dominating the news for weeks. And I gave a talk a while back on terrorism and domestic terrorism, and people may or may not agree that this is an act of domestic terrorism, but I would say it is. Personally, I personally think that it is, because here's what domestic terrorism is according to the definitions of government agencies. Violent criminal acts to further what? Ideological goals stemming from domestic influences, most often what? Fueled by manipulative information. So these definitions have been around for 10 years. So 10 years ago, we knew that these people who transition and end up doing these domestic terrorism style events get that way because they're manipulated by information. That's how they get that way. They didn't start out that way. Some of them are mentally challenged or have mental issues, up to as high as 50%. But what does that mean? They're more susceptible. Yeah, because they have those issues, they're super sensitive to manipulation. And the purpose, and this is a key thing, the bottom line there, the purpose of the violence is not just to hurt or kill. The violence is to do what? Send a message. That's why the violence is committed. How do you get to be this guy, Ramos? How do you get to be him? Well, it gives you an idea here how you get to be him. Struggles with social isolation. How many people have struggled with social isolation in the last 2 years? Yeah, almost all of us to some degree or another, okay? And the people who are already struggling, that's just amplified. That's just amplified by that much more. So struggle, so why are these events all happening now, this sequence of events? Because for 2 years, our whole society has been socially isolated. Okay? Financial instability. True. Stigmatized by other groups, in other words, stereotyped. Remember, we were back in labeling and stereotyping. That's stigmatized by other groups or individuals. Yes or no? Yes. More than 50% have mental, we don't know that about this guy yet. Extreme anger or anxiety. Yes. Okay. No direct line though. However, usually these people who commit these acts, they're what? They're cut off. They can't get in the military because why? You can't exhibit those characteristics and get in. You can't get a job in a government agency. Why? Because you keep exhibiting these things. Now what happens when you make a job application at most places? What do they look at? Your social media history to see who, because where can you find out who you are? Just go to a person's social media history and it'll tell you who they are. All of us, every single one of us, our biases will be laid out in the things. They feel marginalized because they're not part of us. And they often develop this gang mentality because they're looking for somebody like them. They want somebody to be friends with, to get developed as a community. And this is kind of a key thing. They search out others who they think have a unique ability to see the truth. The truth. Okay, designed by who? The manipulative guys who've been feeding them, us, everybody, this pile of crap. And then they become radicalized. And how do they do that? Targeted advocate, all of these targeted technologies, because once they search this thing, what happens? That app, Facebook, feeds them 10 more extreme. They click on one of those. Now what? 10 more extreme. So what happens to all the input that they're getting? More extreme, more extreme, more extreme. That's the algorithm. So the systems are creating these people and us in the diversion and the polarization of the two parties. And the thing. Here's an article or a slide that I almost didn't put in here because it looks pretty biased. But it's the actual statistics, and that gives you an idea of number of people killed post 9/11 in domestic, in other words, killed by guns in the US in a domestic terrorism type things. And you can, and the partisan groups are listed there. And there's a reason for that too, and that's another 1 hour presentation. So what do? I mean, now we know all this crap. We know they're feeding us this dribble. We know the things. What do? Well, here's some ideas. We can learn more about this stuff and understand that it's out there and understand the fake news and get one of those little sheets and put next to your computer that says, look for these things in this site. Look for all caps. Look for the after, in other words, abcnews.com.co. That's fake. That whole site's fake. And you can go in there right now and I'll guarantee that there's ABC News, NBC News, BBC News, Fox News.co. People don't look. They see Fox News, ping, boom. What are they getting? Totally fake site. Totally fake site. So learn about some of those things and learn about and understand why all of these angry messages are out there. Because the anger merchants are trying to get your advertising dollars and pay their salary. That's how they earn their money. Don't rely on the social media for news. Facebook, TikTok, Yahoo, YouTube, new. You can go to BBC, ABC, Fox News type of thing and look through them and do kind of a bias check and know what the biases are and how you can tell them. Don't get caught in echo chambers. How do you do that? You have to do some self-analysis and figure out, you got to figure out what you like and what you don't like. Why, you know, you have to, when you go in a place, stop a minute and say, why am I in here in this website? Why am I, what do I like about this? What made me click on this? Turn off push notifications. Anybody know what push notifications are? Yeah, I mean, they'll send you things when you don't have the app turned on. When you don't have if you don't have Facebook on, you don't have your email on, you don't have your thing on, you turn your settings and say, push them to me, which means what? Every 42 seconds, your phone's going bing, 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 bing. And that's what? Pavlov's dog. Bing. Because, I mean, we'll be in the middle of a pickleball game and Dick will get his phone out because it pinged out there. Because, no, that's not true. But it's, I'm not being totally facetious. People want to answer that ping in 4.2 seconds. They don't want that ping to sit there and relax. That's not what happens. That thing pinged. It's for me. And that's the thing. It's for me. This is for me. This is improving me. So turn those off. You know, they're still there. All that information is still there. You still got it. It just doesn't ping your phone. You know, so you've got to now go in to Facebook, email things, open it and say, oh, Dick sent me a message. Okay. That'll change a lot of that stuff. Limit your time on social media or internet. Oh yeah, well, right. That's not like that's going to happen. But this we all can do. Watch for signs of anger building in ourselves. And we know that when something makes us angry, right? Wouldn't hurt to have a little sticker right here to say, did that make me mad? If it made you mad, why? Because somebody wanted you mad. You see what I mean? It's not you. It's honestly, it's not you. It's not that piece of information. Somebody wanted you mad so they can do it again. You see what I mean? So somehow we have to turn on little filters in ourselves to realize what people are doing to us, trying to do to us. Okay? Don't click on ads, advertisements. You all know that, right? How many click on advertisements? Everyone, come on. You guys, this is crap. Every single one of you out here, including me, clicks on ads. And what happens? More ads, hundreds of thousands of ads, right? So what's the difference between an ad and clicking on a news story? None, zero difference. Because the targeting technology are all set up to do what? Feed you more of whatever you just clicked on. And how do they get your attention? It's got to be more extreme or more volatile or more something, or we won't keep them. So the second part of that is know the impact of clicking on anything. I'm not saying don't click. We can't do that. We are now social media, internet folks. That's what we do. We just have to know what people out there are trying to do to us. This is an intentional thing. And then one of the most important things is here, you got to play your part and watch the content that you share or like. Don't just read through the headline and hit like. Or read through the headline and say, oh yeah, I'm with that, boom, and hit share. Read the whole thing, see if you think it's real, right? But most important, what's the big word there? Pause. And what's the pause? 10 seconds. No, 10 seconds is a long time. It is. If you look at your watch and we say in here Stop, let's stop everything. Silence for 10 seconds. That's a long time. So if you pause for 10 seconds, the odds of you doing that, they go way, 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 way down because you're not caught up in the things. Just like me, writing Dick an email and then I say, I'm gonna send that or not, so the idea is you write your emails and then you put them in your box and you don't send them till the next morning. Yeah, don't send them now. If it's one of those kind of emails, if it's one of those kind of emails and you're gonna slap somebody around a little bit electronically, don't send it right now. I'm not saying don't send it because they probably deserve it, but wait a little bit. Wait a little bit and then look at it and say, is that really me and what I wanted to do? Do that thing. And then the nuclear option, stop this social media crap. Okay, how many of us are going to do that? None. Oh, good man, we have one.
I'd like to shut it off and throw it away.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who would like to, but do they? No. And some people are close. Some people are close. But yes, sir.
One thing is don't add more.
Yes, don't contribute to the pile of poop out there. That's
Sign up for TikTok.
yeah, that's probably a good one. Anyway, you get the idea. That's me. I'm done asking questions. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Jude.
I have an app on my phone for local news and then a red N for news. How do I get rid of those?
They have to look at the app and the phone. It's sometimes harder. It's sometimes harder than it should be to do that. Honestly, I mean, and Dick knows what I'm talking about. It's there somewhere in there, somewhere in that app is a method to delete it. Finding it is a task sometimes. They don't want you to delete it, right? So it's in there. So let me know later, you let me know and I'll try to figure out where it's at for you and help you. Okay. Does that answer? Yeah. Got one next to you, Dick.
Have you ever looked at the site called allsides.com?
Yes.
Okay, and your opinion?
I don't mind it.
What does don't mind it
Well,
mean?
it means like I think about all these and there's one, I brought a list over here of not mine, but these guys recommended sites for relatively reasonable discussions, about as well as you could ask. And there's 4 of them. That's not one of them. But that was in a bigger list of sites that said, these guys are pretty reasonable to look at. 538 News, anybody ever heard of that? That's a fairly reasonable site. Okay. We can pull that out later. I don't have it out now, but you can also go like this bias site on there. They don't ever recommend anybody or disrecommend. They're just trying to give you an idea what the spread is on the thing. But if you type in there recommended online news sites with the least bias, and it'll pop them up. Now that's fake. So then honestly, so you now have to go through that list that pops up and honestly, I'm not kidding you. And you have to now figure out which one of those next 50 are real, which you can do. You can do it. You can figure it out. But the first 3 or 4 that pop up are all fake sites because they're trying to do what? Trying to funnel you where they want to funnel you on the things. And so it's not an easy process to decide a good site from a bad site and do I like it or do I not like it? I personally for news, I use, I subscribe to 5 newspapers digitally and 4 magazines. And I read them all. I read digitally, read them all. And they're like this. Yeah, they're all over the place, on the things. And that's okay, because after 5 of those, you can pretty well kind of get an idea what the real thing, what really is going on. And every one of them has these above the fold idea concept. So you look up BBC News, which I subscribe to BBC News. And you look up BBC News, and their way they rank things totally different than in the US, which I like. Totally different, because what they feel is important is maybe not so important to us, and vice versa. And I like their articles because, but you got to watch it with them. You got to watch that the reporters in the UK, not in the US. It makes a difference. And so, yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Is there one source of truth? Like when I've gotten things before that were, oh, this is terrible. And I have posted it sent it to my son, and he has warned me about it and said, you should check. I forgot now the source, but there was a source he gave me that I could check the truth. Is there one source?
Well, the trouble with those are, and there's 2 or 3 of them that people use all the time, but the naysayers and the people in certain groups say, well, those are all fake and they're biased and what they tell you is false. For instance, Snopes.com, famous site. The people who are pushing fakeness also have what? Sites denigrating Snopes. And you can find hundreds of articles out there denigrating Snopes. So now you have to figure out, is there truth in those or what's the story? My view is Snopes is pretty good. But like anything else, you can't take one source, because they're all biased too, just like all the rest of us in the world, And so the guy they've got running the thing can do some editing, and it may not reflect exactly what Snopes would have wanted it to reflect. But what you can find on Snopes that's really interesting is these fake news stories and things. They have a way of recycling and reappearing year after year after year. And so if you see something that looks really kind of hokey, stupid, you Snopes it. What about this? And then what happens? Well, that first originated in 2012 in Algeria. Honestly, not kidding. That's what happened. It went here, and now it's been rebirthed here as a new news story. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it seems to me a lot of these statements are giving you fear or hate. And where's this coming from? Is there a source that this?
No, I mean, honestly, I'm not kidding you, but the fear and the hate's real. That's the dilemma. I've got to watch it, Ron. Yeah, I know. I could feel Ron just about to whack me. There, he was reaching for the pole. Sorry, Ron. Yeah. So I mean, we haven't really made it all the way to hate yet, as a society, but we got a lot of unresolved anger, a lot of steady state anger being generated out there about lots of topics and lots of things. And I would say it's mostly false. In other words, the reason for the anger is if you look back at the source and the things and figure out what really happened in the things, that anger, because you're being fed stuff to keep that anger going and ratchet it up. Okay? And I don't mean you. I use that word all the time. Jenny slaps me. I don't mean the word you when I'm saying you. I'm talking about individuals and do things. And so it's real. Go ahead, Ron.
You have a question online?
Yes. PolitiFact. PolitiFact is another, they do a pretty good job. Those are the 2 main ones. You can also just, and once again, it's kind of fun, type in fact check. Fact check. Type that in, boom. Now, and then you get to weed through the first 5, which are what? Fake sites. Yeah. And are designed to get you to go somewhere to get you advertise. But in there, you will find some real things. And once you reach Snopes and PolitiFact, now you're into the real sites. And then you go, if there's another site, you check them on Snopes. Yeah, and on PolitiFact. And then you, on that side, if you think that's good, then you check Snopes on that side. And what does that do? It gives you an idea of how they treat other organizations and people that are doing the same things and what do they have to say about them. And you can, in 2 or 3 clicks, get a good idea of whether this is a real site or not, whether they're doing what things. But the anger, I mean, that's, Judy kind of spurred this whole presentation in a board a couple months ago or something, but about the thing, but why is all this stuff happening, you know, and things, and I said, well, that's a good presentation. And as you get into this, it's almost scientific. I hate to say this, it's almost scientific what's happening, and it's not, I would say, the anger merchants, their intent is not to have people kill people. You see what I'm saying? That's not their intent. Their intent is to get more viewers and get more money. But they get more radical, more things because somebody more radical comes out and they suck some of their viewers off. So now they got to compete. Pass the mic, please.
Rafi,
Oh, hang on. Go ahead. I'll take one over here first and then.
quick question. If you deal with legitimate news sources, is there reasonable assurance that they say is true?
No, but no, I mean, honestly, yes, I would say, for instance, but they're biased. It's true. There's a difference between true and bias, right? Okay. You understand the difference, what I'm trying to make here? And so the problem that we have run into as a society is that there's an event out there that happens and then it's politicized or demonized immediately. Somebody's to blame, and we're gonna hammer them in the things. And I'm talking, you know, like the police shootings or like a fire. What happens? There's a fire and a building burns down, and then they say, well, if the mayor had fired this police chief back in 2016 when he, you know, did something, we wouldn't be here. And that's the headline, not the fire. You see what I'm saying? So I would say yes, you know, all the media sources and actually, you know, omission and commission, right? So if you watch the actual news on Fox News and NBC, it's not really news, but Fox News, NBC, and MSNBC and CNN now, it's not bad, you know, it's mostly news. You know, it's only when you get 30 minutes later and then boom, and you're off over here somewhere doing the thing. But my opinion, ABC, NBC, BBC, New York Times, New York Post even, you cannot stay in business as a major league newspaper or magazine and publish hooey. You can be biased and your opinion pages can be biased, but your news articles have to be on track. See what I'm saying? So New York Times, Washington Post, those are all liberal if you look in that chart, but they're where? If you look at the fact part, where are they? They're up at the top, okay? So their fact part is good, but they got the same hooey in their opinion pages as everybody else. You see what I mean? And then you look at the New York Post, the Washington Times, not the Washington Post. Washington Times, that's the what? It's a right-wing newspaper in Washington, D.C. New York Post is owned by who? Yeah, and so, I mean, you got these, but their news articles are what? Not so bad. Because what? They'd be obliterated if they start posting totally false stuff. They just they wouldn't exist anymore. But their opinion pages are out here. So my answer is, yeah, but be careful of bias. Where is the article in this thing? On TV, what's the lead article from NBC News that night? And how do they couch it? What's the headline? You know, we had a couple headlines in here. Well, wait a minute, doesn't have anything to do with what happened. You're trying to point the finger at somebody in this thing. And so you got to just be careful. Okay, over here.
Why don't you take the ones on
You got one on? No.
well, isn't there kind of an evolutionary process where all this extremity collides and collapses from its own weight?
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. But how does that happen? I mean, what's the physical mechanism for reconciliation? I don't understand. I don't understand because this is so ingrained in our system now that somebody who has different ideas than you can't talk to. Doesn't matter which side, whose side, whatever. It turns into what right away? Louder is more right. It turns into louder is more, except for Tom and I, we argue all the time and we don't usually get louder. Usually, sometimes we do, but not usually. But that's what happens, and you can see it happening around you. And these are friends, right? And what has all this stuff done? It's turned friends against friends and family against family. And why? Because they're what? Angry. They're angry and they want what? Revenge. And so it's I don't know. There's no, you know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to tap dance.
I understand.
Yeah, I'm not trying to tap dance too much here other than I don't know how you get out of this because of what's driving it. It's not, it's kind of like we were just talking about. It's not really the people driving it, it's the money driving it on the things. And so until money does not become the driving factor, I don't see any way out of the things, because we are not clever enough to catch everything that's false. Any of us. They're too good. They're too good at what they do. We're all going to be either made angry or ship things on we shouldn't have. That 3 days later, we're going to finally figure out, oh, that. But this is another thing we don't ever do. We never go back and retract. We never go back, or we never put a black and white post on and say, whoops, I screwed that one up. I shouldn't have, that was a mistake. How many of those have you seen? Not me. Yeah. Yeah.
Just a comment. That was one of the issues 20 or 25 years ago, as the internet started getting up and running, was how to monetize it. And
Yeah.
This is the model that we've monetized it with.
Yeah.
Advertising and crazy advertising.
Right.
sometimes.
Yeah. No, you're right. And there was a big dilemma because they couldn't figure it out.
There was an
Back
awful
when
lot
they
of-
first
yeah.
came out, and they wanted to specifically deny advertising at the time
Yeah.
because they didn't want that to take over. Well, but most people, unless you've been into a presentation like this or are stupid in research like I do, don't know this is happening. They know about the anger, and they know about getting in arguments with their friends, and they know about the division, but they don't know why. They don't know, now we should know why it's doing that. And I, getting out of the cycle, really, really hard, really, really hard to get out of that cycle. And I tell you what, if I could figure that out, I wouldn't be here in Alpena, Michigan. And so it'd be,
Well,
yeah.
Our generation is experiencing changes that when we grew up, it was just like, I'm glad I was born when I was born. And I feel frustrated because there's nothing I can do about it. That's
Okay.
how I feel. And I'm concerned about the youth, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. What are they going to face? And is there anything that I could do right now to make a difference?
Sure. You can be calm, cool, and collected. And if you see anger, you can diffuse it. Yeah, no, I mean, because the kids get angry, what, all the time? Yeah, they beat the crap out of each other, and then 2 minutes later, they're back best friends. Right? Except now you have people who kids never get out from in front of that phone or some other electronic thing. And what are they doing? They're getting fed this drivel. Yeah, they're getting fed this drivel over. Are you going to get them to stop looking at that phone? No, that's Pavlov's dog. They've got that phone. So what you have to figure out is, and parents and grandparents and great grandparents have to watch for signs of anger. You got to watch for signs of, I would say, misplaced anger. Anger is not a bad thing. Just like this guy says, been around since there's people. Anger's been around. Anger's a good thing as long as it goes away. As long as it goes away. And so if we have kids, grandkids, kids, where we see anger and it's not going away, every time we see them, they're ranting and railing about something. Okay, they're ranting all the time. There's no downtime. Then it might be time for an intervention of some kind, to say, oh, do you know what's happening? Think about this. And this kind of think about this. This could be what's happening. This could be why you're so angry. And if people know that this is a possibility, they have a much better chance of combating it personally if they know. No, I thought we had one. Okay, that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming.